Welcome to another night of shadows and dreams with Uncle Grim. Tonight we have a special tale, a dark journey into a soul forged in tragedy and cloaked in fear. So find a comfortable position. Let the weight of the day fall away from your shoulders. Before going any further, simple click on that like button, a gentle tap on subscribe. It lets me know you're out there, listening in the dark. And in the comments below, tell me where you're listening from. It's a comfort to know how far these whispers travel. Now, close your eyes. The story is waiting. Tonight's tale is Batman's Nightmare. The rain over Gotham City doesn't fall. It seeps. It's a perpetual greasy mist that clings to the gargoyles and slicks the asphalt with a sheen of liquid darkness. It blurs the neon signs until they bleed into one another, creating monstrous, shifting colors in the puddles below. For the man who called this city his ward, the rain was a constant companion, a baptism and a shroud, all at once. Tonight, it felt different, heavier. Each drop that struck the armored cowl of the batsuit felt like a tiny stone, a cumulative weight pressing down, not just on his body, but on his will. He had been awake for 74 hours. He'd told Alfred 72, a small, pointless lie to soften the edges of the butler's inevitable concern. The truth was, he couldn't be sure of the exact number anymore. Time had begun to fray at the edges, moments blurring into a continuous, grueling loop of sirens, screams, and the dull, rhythmic thud of his fists against bone and sinew. A riot at Blackgate, orchestrated by the Penguin as a diversion for a weapons shipment at the docks. A chemical bomb threat by a new player calling himself Dr. Foss, which had sent him scrambling through the city's labyrinthine sewer system. And in between, the endless, grinding attrition of the city's mundane savagery. Muggings, break-ins, assaults. The small fires he was constantly stamping out to prevent the entire forest from burning down. He stood now atop the old Gotham Cathedral, a black statue against a bruised purple sky, the city sprawling beneath him like a dying leviathan. His body ached in a way that was deeper than muscle. It was a weariness of the soul. The Kevlar weave of his suit felt like a cage, the cowl a suffocating mask. His vision swam, the distant lights of the city smearing together. He could hear Alfred's voice in his calm, a calm, persistent buzz he'd been ignoring for the last hour. "Sir, Bruce, a moment's respite is not a surrender. The city will still be here when you return." But would it? That was the fear that fueled him, the gnawing terror that if he stopped, even for a breath, the entire fragile construct would collapse. If he blinked, another family would be shattered in another dark alley. He finally conceded, not with words, but with a that fogged the inside of his visor. The grapple fired with a familiar pneumatic hiss, and he swung into the night, a pendulum of exhaustion arcing through the rain. The journey back to the cave was an autopilot sequence, his body performing the practiced maneuvers while his mind drifted on a gray tide. He barely registered the smooth landing, the hiss of the canopy, the rumbling opening of the secret entrance. When he finally stumbled out of the car, the cowl pulled back. The first thing he saw was Alfred's face, etched with a deep, paternal worry that was more painful than any punch. Alfred said nothing, merely took the heavy cowl from his hands and draped a warm, dry towel over his shoulders. The silence was its own reprimand, gentle but firm. Bruce Wayne, the man beneath the armor, swayed on his feet. The cave, usually a sanctuary of focus and control, felt vast and unsettling. The giant penny seemed to mock him with its absurd scale, the robotic dinosaur, a relic of a simpler, more foolish time. The hum of the bat computer was a low, accusatory thrum. He made it to the cot he kept near the medical bay, shrugging off Alfred's attempts to help him with the armor plating. He needed to feel the release himself, the shedding of the skin. Piece by piece, the weight lifted, until he was left in just the black undersuit, shivering not from the cave's chill, but from a profound internal cold. He didn't even make it to the manor, to his bed. He collapsed onto the cot, the world finally dissolving into a welcome, absolute blackness. Sleep did not come as a gentle visitor. It was an undertow, pulling him down with a frightening speed into depths he could not navigate. There was no gentle transition, no soft fading of consciousness. One moment he was on the cot, the next he was standing, fully garbed as Batman again, atop the Gotham Cathedral. But it wasn't the same. The rain had stopped. The air was unnaturally still, thick and cloying, like the air in a sealed tomb. It smelled of dust and old regrets. The city below was silent, not quiet, silent. No sirens, no traffic, no distant shouts, just a profound, dead emptiness that pressed in on his ears. The gargoyles, his silent stone companions, seemed different. Their leering faces were twisted into expressions of genuine malice, their stony eyes seeming to track his every move. He reached up to touch his cowl, and his gauntlet came back stained with a fine gray powder. He looked down and saw that the cathedral itself was crumbling, turning to dust before his eyes, flaking away in the dead air. He felt a presence behind him. He didn't hear it, didn't see it, but he felt it. A shift in the psychic weight of the world. He turned slowly, every instinct honed by years of combat screaming at him. Standing there, amidst the decaying stone, was a figure. It wore the tattered burlap mask and ragged clothes of the Scarecrow, but it was not Jonathan Crane. This figure was tall, impossibly gaunt, its limbs long and spidery like a desiccated insect. There was no canister of fear toxin, no scythe. It simply stood, its head cocked. "You look tired, Batman," it said. The voice was not Crane's reedy tenor. It was a dry, rustling sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was a voice that sounded ancient, a voice that knew him. "All this running, all this fighting, and for what? The city is quieter now, isn't it? I've made it quiet for you." Batman fell into a defensive stance, his mind racing. A new fear toxin, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. He ran a diagnostic through his cowl's sensors. All systems green. No foreign compounds detected in his bloodstream. He was by all accounts perfectly fine. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. This felt real. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice sounding hollow and small in the oppressive silence. The figure took a languid step forward, its movements disjointed and unnatural. "You know who I am. I am the question you never dare to ask yourself in the quiet hours. I am the final tally of your balance sheet. I am the architect of this little respite, a place where you can finally see the truth." The figure gestured with a long, twig-like finger towards the silent city. "Look at it. No crime, no suffering, no noise. Isn't this the peace you've been fighting for?" Batman's eyes scanned the cityscape, and a cold dread began to pool in his stomach. The figure was right. It was peaceful, but it was the peace of a graveyard. The windows of the skyscrapers were dark, empty sockets. The streets were barren. There was no life. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice tight with rage. The Scarecrow thing chuckled, a sound like grinding stones. "I have done nothing. This is merely a reflection of your true impact. You see, you think of yourself as a surgeon, cutting out the cancer of this city, but you're not. You're a pesticide. You don't cure the disease, you just kill everything it touches. The good, the bad, it all withers in your shadow." The figure began to walk a slow circle around him. "You chase the Joker, and in the chaos, a dozen families lose their businesses. You fight the Penguin, and the Crossfire claims a child on her way home from school. You stop a robbery, and the traumatized clerk never feels safe again. You don't save them, you just change the way they are broken." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, striking at the deepest insecurities that lurked beneath his armor. These were the whispers that haunted him in the rare moments of stillness, the doubts he crushed with action and fury. But here, in this silent world, there was nowhere to run. The whispers were being given a voice. You create them, you know. The voice rustled on, relentless. Before you, there was just disorganized crime, greed, simple, ugly, human greed. But you escalated things. You became a myth, a creature of the night. So the city, in its beautiful, terrible symmetry, had to create myths to fight you. The Joker, the Riddler, Crane himself, they are your children, Batman, born of the shadow you cast. The figure stopped directly in front of him, its dark, stitched eyes boring into his. Your mission isn't just a failure, it's a catalyst. You are the source of the very poison you seek to cure, and the deepest, darkest part of you, the part that crouches behind the symbol and the rage, has always known it. Suddenly, the stone beneath his feet gave way. The cathedral dissolved into a cascade of gray dust, and he was falling through an endless, starless void. The scarecrow's dry laughter echoing all around him. The nightmare had only just begun. He landed without impact, his feet finding purchase on slick, wet cobblestones. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and cheap perfume. He knew this place instantly. It was etched into his soul, a scar on his memory that never faded. Crime Alley. But it was wrong. The dimensions were skewed, the buildings leaning in at impossible angles, their windows like accusing eyes. The streetlights cast a sickly, jaundiced glow, illuminating a scene. Thomas and Martha Wayne emerging from the Monarch Theater. But they weren't walking out. They were gliding, like figures on a macabre carousel. Their faces serene, almost beatific. Then he appeared, the killer, Joe Chill. But it wasn't Chill. The man who stepped from the shadows was wearing a tattered trench coat and a fedora. But when he raised the gun, the face was his own. Bruce Wayne's face, but older, haggard, the lines of grief carved deep into his features. It was the face he saw in the mirror on his worst nights. He watched, paralyzed, as his own likeness confronted his parents. There was no sound, but he could read the words on their lips. A pantomime of terror he knew by heart. The pearls. He saw his mother's pearl necklace break, the beads scattering across the grimy pavement like fallen stars, each one a tiny, perfect sphere of lost hope. He tried to scream, to rush forward, but his feet were fused to the ground. He was a spectator at his own genesis, a ghost at his own haunting. Then the scene shifted. The gun in his doppelganger's hand turned, and it was pointed not at his parents but at him, the watching Batman, and his parents. Their faces no longer fearful but filled with a profound, sorrowful disappointment. Turned to look at him too. His mother's lips formed a single silent word. Why? His father's expression was harder, a mask of cold judgment. You were there, Bruce. You did nothing. Why weren't you stronger? The words, though silent, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. The alley dissolved around him, the leaning buildings melting like wax, and he was in a new place, a place of chilling, echoing silence. He was standing in a long, impossibly vast hallway. It stretched into infinity in both directions, the ceiling lost in shadow above. The walls were lined with shattered glass display cases, lit from within by a cold, sterile light. As he walked, his boots crunching on broken glass, he realized what he was seeing. It was a gallery of his failures, a hall of broken robins. In the first case, a tattered red, green, and yellow uniform was draped over a broken trapeze wire over a Dick Grayson. The glass was spiderwebbed with cracks, and through them he could hear the faint, ghostly sound of a circus crowd gasping in horror. A whisper slithered out from the display. "You trained me to fly, Bruce, but you forgot to teach me how to land. You pushed me away, into the cold." He moved to the next case, a cold dread making his movements stiff. Inside this one, there was nothing but a bloody crowbar and a single torn domino mask. Jason Todd. The air around the case was freezing, and the whispers that emanated from it were raw with anger and betrayal. "Why didn't you kill him? Why is he still out there, laughing after what he did to me? Your code, your precious code. Was it worth more than me, old man? Was it?" He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. He couldn't escape the whispers. They were coming from all sides now, weaving together into a chorus of accusation. He forced himself to move on, to the next case, and the next. One held a splintered bowstaff and a shredded cape, a tribute to Tim Drake. The whisper was more subtle, more wounded. "I figured it out. I found you. I believed in you. But all I ever was to you was a replacement, wasn't I? A patch to hold the mission together. You never saw me, just the symbol I wore." Further down, a case held a small gleaming katana, its blade shattered into a dozen pieces. "Damien." The voice that came from this one was laced with an arrogant, childish pain that cut him to the quick. "You said I could be better than them, Father. Better than the League of Assassins. But you sent me out to die. Another soldier in your pointless war. Was my blood not worthy?" He walked faster, trying to outpace the voices, but the hall stretched on. There were more cases, dozens of them. Some held familiar artifacts, a broken motorcycle belonging to Barbara Gordon, her oracle glasses cracked. "He took my legs, Bruce. And you just put him back in his cell. Again and again." Others were unfamiliar, phantoms of what might have been. A spoiler costume, torn and muddied, a bluebird's wings, clipped and broken. Ghosts of protégés he had failed or would fail in the future. The hall was a testament to his greatest sin. Not the villains he fought, but the children he had pulled into his crusade. The young lives he had risked and in his heart had broken. He had taken their hope, their youth, and forged them into weapons. And this nightmare was showing him the cost. He was no savior. He was a general, marching an army of children into a battle they could never truly win. He clutched his head, the whispers rising to a deafening roar, a symphony of guilt and grief. The floor beneath him cracked open, and again he was falling, tumbling through a blackness filled with the echoing accusations of the children he had failed. This time, he landed on soft, sawdust-covered ground. The air smelled of popcorn, cheap sugar, and something else. Something metallic and vaguely sickening, like old blood. Distorted, Off-key calliope music drifted from somewhere in the distance, a tune that sounded like a happy memory being strangled. He was in a carnival, an amusement park, but it was deserted and decaying. The rides were rusted skeletons, their bright paint peeling to reveal corroded metal beneath. The game stalls were boarded up, the stuffed animal prizes hanging from their nooses, their button eyes black and empty. And in the center of it all, standing by a warped funhouse mirror, was him, the Joker. But this was a Joker he had never seen before. There was no manic grin, no wild cackle. His face, still chalk white with the ruby red slash of a mouth, was calm, almost serene. His green hair was neatly combed. He wore a pristine purple suit and stood with the quiet dignity of a funeral director. He simply watched Batman approach, a knowing, pitying look in his unnervingly sane eyes. "Welcome," the Joker said, his voice a perfectly normal conversational baritone. It was more disturbing than any shriek. "I thought it was time we had a proper talk, without all the theatrics." Batman said nothing. His fists clenched. Of all the horrors this dream could conjure, a sane Joker was the most profoundly unsettling. "Don't be like that, Bats," the Joker continued, gesturing to the funhouse mirror. "Look. See for yourself." Bruce forced himself to look at his reflection. He saw Batman, dark and imposing. But standing beside him in the reflection was the Joker, and their outlines bled into one another. The sharp points of Batman's cowl seemed to merge with the pointed angles of the Joker's shoulders. The black of his cape swirled with the purple of the suit. The mirror wasn't just reflecting them, it was merging them. "You see," the Joker said softly, "one bad day. That's all that separates us. You took your pain and channeled it into a symbol, a crusade. I took mine and turned it into the punchline of the ultimate joke. But it's the same pain, isn't it? The same screaming abyss, right behind the eyes." The Joker began to walk, and Batman found himself compelled to follow, a silent prisoner on a guided tour of his own failures. The Joker led him to a rusted Ferris wheel. Each car that creaked by overhead contained a tableau. In one, he saw Commissioner Gordon holding the body of his wife, Sarah Essen. The Joker's bullet hole a dark flower on her chest. Gordon looked up as the car passed, his face a mask of weary grief, and he just shook his head in disappointment. In another car, he saw Barbara Gordon in a wheelchair, staring down at her own lifeless legs, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. The Joker didn't laugh. He just pointed, a silent master of ceremonies. "Every time you put me back in Arkham, you're just hitting the reset button," he said conversationally. "You're giving me another chance to try a new joke. A better joke. A joke with a more permanent punchline. You could have stopped it so many times. One moment of clarity, one broken rule, but you won't. Because you need me." He stopped at a tunnel of love ride, the water in its channel stagnant and black. "You need me to be the monster so you can be the hero. You need the chaos so your order has a purpose. I am your raison d'etre, Batman. Without me, you're just a sad man in a costume, punching purse snatchers. I give you meaning." The Joker leaned in close, his breath smelling of nothing at all, which was somehow worse than anything. This is your carnival. Your creation, every broken life, every shattered soul in this city since you first put on that cape, they're all your attractions, your monument. And the funniest part of all, the biggest joke, you think you're in control. The calm facade finally broke. The Joker's mouth stretched into that familiar, terrifying grin, a red gash in his white face. But the laughter that came out wasn't manic. It was a deep, booming, soundless laugh that echoed inside Batman's skull, a vibration of pure, unadulterated madness. The carnival dissolved into a vortex of shrieking color and silent laughter, and he was thrown from the dreamscape once more. He found himself airborne, not falling, but flying, soaring high above Gotham the way he so often did. But this was not his city. This was a necropolis, a city of ghosts. The buildings were intact, the lights were on, but the streets below were filled with people. Millions of them. They were all standing still, their faces turned up towards him as he passed overhead. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions blank. They were the lost, the forgotten, the collateral damage of his war. He recognized faces in the crowd. The security guard who died during one of Riddler's elaborate games, the family of 4 who perished when Firefly burned down their apartment building, the beat cop who had been in the wrong place during a clash with Bane's forces. They weren't angry. They weren't accusatory. They just watched. Their silent, collective gaze was an unbearable weight, a judgment more damning than any scream. He flew over the courthouse, and there, on the steps, stood Harvey Dent. Not Two-Face, with his scarred flesh and mismatched suit. This was District Attorney Harvey Dent, Gotham's White Knight, just as he was before the acid. He was pristine in his tailored suit, his coin held not for a decision, but held out as if an offering. He was weeping. Silent tears streamed down his unblemished face as he looked out over the haunted city. As Batman flew closer, Harvey looked up, his eyes meeting the Dark Knight's. He didn't speak, but the message was clear in his sorrowful gaze. I believed in the light, Bruce. I believed in the law. But your darkness, it swallowed everything. It swallowed me. This, he realized, was the ultimate truth of his nightmare. His struggle wasn't just a failure to save people from dying, it was a failure to save the city's soul. He had fought monsters in the dark for so long that he had drenched the entire city in that darkness. He had tried to rule by fear, and in doing so, had snuffed out the very hope he had sworn to protect. The hope represented by men like Harvey Dent. He could fight the criminals, the madmen, but he couldn't fight this. He couldn't fight the pervasive sorrow, the quiet despair that had settled over his city like a shroud. The silent judgment of the dead and the tears of the damned were a foe his fists could not touch. The sky above him began to crack, like black glass fracturing under an immense pressure. The dream was breaking apart, but not to release him. It was collapsing inward, pulling him toward its horrifying core. He felt a presence coalesce around him, the same cold, ancient intelligence from the cathedral. The rustling voice of the dream scarecrow echoed in his mind, no longer coming from a physical form, but from the very fabric of the nightmare itself. Now, the voice whispered. A dry wind carrying the dust of crumbled empires. Every victory is a defeat. Every life saved is a prelude to a dozen more lost. Your crusade is a monument to your own ego, built on a foundation of bones. This is your truth. The fractured sky dissolved, and he found himself floating in a calm, empty space, a void of soft gray light. Before him stood the gaunt, terrifying scarecrow thing, the architect of his torment. But I am not without mercy, it rustled. I can offer you a choice, a release. The gray void shifted, and a scene played out before him, not as a memory, but as a vibrant, living moment. He saw himself, but it was a Bruce Wayne he barely recognized. He was older, his face lined with laughter instead of grief. He was sitting on the porch of a beautiful country estate, sunlight dappling through the leaves of a large oak tree. A woman with the grace of a cat and the warm smile of a lover. Selina Kyle leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Children, their laughter bright and clear, played on the sprawling lawn. There was no bat signal in the sky, no police scanner crackling in the background. There was just peace, a profound, aching peace he had never known. This can be yours, the architect whispered. An escape, a world where your parents never died in that alley, a world where the Batman was never needed. You can lay down your burden, Bruce. You can rest. All you have to do is stay here. Stay with me in the truth of your failure. Accept this penance, and this peace can be your eternal reward, a dream from which you never have to wake. The offer was seductive beyond measure, an end to the pain, an end to the guilt, the struggle, the unending war. To let go, to accept that he had lost, and in that surrender, find a happiness he had long ago sacrificed. His soul screamed for it. Every aching muscle, every shattered nerve, every fractured piece of his heart yearned for that porch, for that sunlight, for that peace, to just stop. He looked at the vision, at the laughing at children, at Selina's contented smile. It was everything he had ever secretly wanted, ever. It was a life, a real life. But then another face swam into his mind. A kind, tired, endlessly patient face. Alfred. Alfred, who had raised him, who had stitched his wounds, who had stood by him through every dark night, who had never given up hope. He was not in this vision of peace, because this peace was a lie, a beautiful, perfect lie. And in that moment, he remembered the core of it all, the real reason. It wasn't about winning. It was never about achieving a perfect crime-free utopia. He knew, he had always known, that was impossible. The reason he put on the cape, the reason he endured the pain, was simpler. It was a promise promise to an 8-year-old boy kneeling in a pool of his parents' blood that he would do everything in his power to make sure no other child would ever have to feel that same tearing, world-ending agony. It wasn't about eradicating all darkness. It was about being a single, stubborn candle in that darkness, a light for those who were lost in it, a symbol not of victory, but of defiance. He had failed. He had made mistakes. He had hurt people he loved. The nightmare was right about all of that. His mission was flawed, impossible, and he was just a man, a broken man, tilting at the windmills of human misery. But he was still trying, and he would not stop. He turned his gaze from the beautiful illusion and faced the architect of his nightmare. He faced the embodiment of his own doubt. "No," he said, his voice quiet but resonating with a newfound strength. The vision of peace flickered like a faulty projection. The scarecrow thing tilted its head. "No, you would choose the pain, the guilt, the endless, pointless fight." "It's not pointless," Batman said, taking a step forward. The gray void trembled. "Even if I only save one life, if I stop one child from becoming what I became, then it's worth it. My failures are real. The pain is real. So is the hope. I will not surrender to despair, not yours, and not my own." He had accepted the truth of the nightmare. He was flawed. He was human. And that wasn't a weakness. It was his strength. It was the wellspring of his compassion, the source of his empathy. He didn't fight because he was a perfect, unstoppable symbol. He fought because he knew what it was to be hurt, to be afraid, and to be alone. "I choose to wake up," he declared. The scarecrow thing shrieked, sound of tearing fabric and breaking bone, its calm demeanor shattering. The gray void collapsed, and the nightmare fought back, unwilling to release its prisoner. The horrors returned, a frantic, desperate onslaught. He was back in the alley, his parents' corpses accusing him. He was in the Hall of Robins, their whispers a hurricane of guilt. He was in the Joker's carnival, the silent laughter shaking his very bones. But it was different now. The images no longer held the same power over him. He saw them not as absolute truths, but as manifestations of his fear. He walked through the ghostly crowd of the unsaved city, but now he met their gaze not with guilt, but with a silent promise to honor their memory, to do better. He was climbing out of the abyss, hand over hand, pulling himself back toward the surface, back toward reality. The dream world cracked and crumbled around him, the architect's shriek fading into a frustrated hiss. He felt a tremendous weight pressing down on him, the crushing gravity of his own psyche trying to pull him back under. But he kept climbing, focusing on a single image in his mind, the first ray of dawn striking the highest spire in Gotham. He woke with a gasp, his body jerking upright on the cot. The air in the Batcave was cold and real. The steady hum of the computer was a comforting drone. The giant penny and the dinosaur were just silly, familiar landmarks. He was drenched in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at his hands, expecting them to be covered in the gray dust of the Dream Cathedral. But they were just his own hands, scarred and calloused. He was back. He was awake. A figure moved in the periphery, and he flinched, his body still coiled for a fight. But it was only Alfred, holding a glass of water. The butler's face was a mask of professional calm, but his eyes betrayed a deep-seated relief. "A rough night, Master Bruce?" Alfred asked, his voice the calmest, most reassuring sound in the world. Bruce took the water, his hand trembling slightly. He drank it all in one go, the cool liquid a blessing against his parched throat. He looked around the cave, at the screens displaying the city's vitals, at the suits of armor standing like silent sentinels, at the tools of his trade laid out with meticulous care. This was his reality. The struggle was real. The pain was real, but it was his choice. He looked up at Alfred, the man who was more of a father to him than anyone. He wanted to explain the horrors he had seen, the truths he had been forced to confront, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just said, "The mission, it is necessary," Alfred finished for him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "And you are not alone in it. Now, I believe the sun is rising, a phenomenon you have not willingly witnessed in some time. Perhaps a change of scenery is in order." Bruce nodded slowly. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the thought of this sun didn't fill him with dread. The daylight wasn't the enemy, a glaring spotlight on his nocturnal world. Today it felt different. He stood, his body still aching with a phantom weariness, but his spirit felt lighter. He had walked through the valley of his own personal hell and had chosen to walk out the other side. The nightmare had shown him his deepest fears, and in confronting them, he had found a renewed, albeit somber, sense of purpose. The city was still out there. The monsters were still out there, but so was he. He was not a god. He was not an infallible symbol. He was just a man who refused to give up. And for now, that was enough. He walked with Alfred towards the elevator that would take them up into the manor, up into the dawn of a new day, leaving the shadows of the cave and the nightmare behind there. And so, the bat awakens, not cleansed, not cured, but perhaps thoughtful, understood. For the greatest nightmares are not the ones with monsters and ghouls, but the ones that whisper our own truths back to us in the dark. The ones that hold up a mirror to our deepest doubts. Bruce Wayne survived his nightmare, as he always does. He puts the armor back on, both the physical and the emotional, and returns to his eternal war. But perhaps with a small new understanding, an acceptance of the man inside the cowl. And you, my dear listener, as you drift now into your own subconscious seas, may your dreams be kinder. May your own inner demons remain sleeping, and may you find peace in the quiet dark. Until we meet again, sleep well.